To Couch Casual, where today we are going to be discussing our wide receiver and tight end free agents slash trade targets as well. Last time we did quarterbacks and running backs, and as I mentioned before, we are going to cover some of the top receivers and also tight ends that are free agents or that could get traded. Before we get into this video, make sure to subscribe. It really helps the channel a lot. If you don't want to miss more, hit the subscribe button and also turn the notification bell on so you're notified when new videos come out, because the NFL offseason is in full swing and we are going to be making a lot of videos over the NFL offseason, so make sure you don't miss out on those videos in the future. But without further ado, let's begin with these sort of predictions here. The first player up is Zach Ertz. Last season he was Commanders tight end as they went on to make it to the NFC Championship. He does seem like he's not going to retire. Seems like he's going to play another season. And so I do think he'll play. I don't think he'll retire. And to be honest, I think he is just going to go back to the Commanders. They had so much success. I don't see why he would want to leave Washington. They have the money as well. They have a ton of money. And it's not like he's going to be asking for a lot of money. So I think this is just a perfect match for them. Bring him back. It worked. He's got good trust with Jayden Daniels, especially in the playoffs. You saw that as well. So I think it's a no-brainer for them to bring him back. Next is Tyler Conklin, Jets tight end. It's not the most supreme tight end class, that's for sure. But Tyler Conklin, he's a very solid tight end. Played for the Jets last year. I do think he will end up leaving the Jets, though. They don't have a ton of money. And I think he will be asking for more than they can pay because he had an okay season. He had the most touchdowns in a season that he's ever had with 4. And a fit I like for Conklin is the Colts. And the reason being is because another thing I like for the Colts, another match, is Tyler Conklin, the Penn State draft pick. And I think Tyler Conklin could be a relatively cheap guy you can bring on to be in that tight end room. With Tyler Conklin, he can help, or with Tyler Warren, he can help mentor Tyler Warren. So I think it's a good match. And you get the two Tylers in the same tight end room with each other. Next up is Mike Gesicki, former Bengals tight end. He was originally on the Dolphins for, I think, the entire other part of his career. Then he went to Cincy on a 1-year deal. Had a very good, successful season for Cincy. And just like Zach Ertz on that 1-year deal, I think he had too much success. They have the money. I think the Bengals do bring back Mike Gesicki. Again, a solid season for him in Cincinnati. If we look at his stats here, he had 600 yards, 2 touchdowns, 65 catches. He wasn't even their starting tight end, so I think you can just bring him back as a solid guy to be in that tight end room. Last tight end is Juwan Johnson of the New Orleans Saints. Probably the best tight end available, maybe outside of Zach Ertz. He is the best. He didn't even start for the Saints, though, mainly because they have a lot of guys there, including, mainly Taysom Hill. And I do think that he is going to leave because the Saints just have no money. They are in insane amounts of negative cap room right now. So they just don't have the money, I don't think, to spend a guy who only started 5 games for them. So I do think they will let Juwan Johnson walk, especially because I think when I looked at Spot Track, his projected salary is like $10 million. I don't think the Saints are paying a guy that started 5 games for them $10 million a year, especially at the tight end position when they have Taysom Hill. So I do think he leaves, And I think a team that could use a tight end, uh, isn't necessarily in the position to get a guy like Tyler Warren, I think is the Chargers. They have a ton of money to spend. They need to help Herbert out. Their defense is solid as it is. They could be big spenders or trade destinations for receivers. There's some running backs they could get. They could draft those guys as well. But I feel like the one position that doesn't have the top free agents, doesn't have a top guy in the draft that the Chargers could realistically land, or doesn't have a big a guy that they could trade for, is the tight end market. So to get a solid, productive guy when starting, like Juwan Johnson, and when you have the money like the Chargers do, I think this is a good fit because they got, I think, Hayden Hurst last year. They had like Hurst and Will Dissly as their tight ends. I don't think that's going to cut it. I think a guy like Juwan Johnson, maybe they get a guy like Colston Loveland in the draft, or there's also like Harold Fannin. But I think whether you draft a guy or not, Juwan Johnson's a good short-term gap tight end that can, I think, give you more production than like Will Dissly or Hayden Hurst did for you last year. Now we go on to the receivers. Speaking of the Chargers, the first one we have is Josh Palmer. As much as I was saying that the Chargers have the money to spend and that they should help out Herbert, I do think they will end up losing Josh Palmer. Not saying they won't replace him with somebody, but I do think he is going to be someone that they end up letting go. And I think a team that, kind of has the money to spend on just a solid depth receiver that could just, honestly, this team could just use receivers. They could just use talent in that room. I think is the Raiders. They could draft a quarterback like Shedeur Sanders. They could sign a top guy. I did have them signing one of the top free agent quarterbacks in my video that I did a week ago. Make sure to check that out. So you could sign him for that guy or a rookie quarterback that they end up drafting. But he's not that expensive. So although you have a lot of cap, he's not going to cost you a ton. He's just talent. He's just a good receiver in that receiver room that isn't very good outside of Jakobi Meyers. I guess technically Brock Bowers as well. He's a receiver. So I like the fit of Palmer to the Raiders just to give them somebody outside of Meyers in that receiver room. Next up is Hollywood Brown, Marquise Brown. Signed a 1-year deal for the Chiefs, but then got injured very early on and didn't really get to play with Mahomes and the Chiefs. And you saw when he came back, when Hopkins was there, you saw that Chiefs offense slowly pick it up, mainly Xavier Worthy. He had a much better second half of the season when he had healthy, and they didn't even have Rashee Rice, but when they had healthy receivers around Worthy, especially guys that are respected, that their speed is respected, like Hollywood Brown, it opened up so much more for Worthy. And we didn't even get to see Hollywood play in this Chiefs offense that much. He barely even played for them. So I think they will bring him back on another short-term-ish deal. Have him, Rashee Rice, Xavier Worthy, probably end up letting D-Hop go, which we'll get to later in this video. I don't think they can sign both of those guys. I don't think they'll end up signing both of those guys. But if they had to choose one, I think they'll go with the maybe slightly younger option and the guy that can sort of provide that downfield separation like Hollywood can. Next receiver is Keenan Allen from the Chicago Bears. Signed a 1-year deal for them. We got traded to them from the Chargers. Now he's a free agent. He didn't have like the craziest season on the Bears, but he didn't have a bad season by any means. 700 yards, 7 touchdowns for 70 catches. So it wasn't the end. It wasn't a bad season by any means for him. But he also didn't have his greatest performance. He was also somewhat injured. He did play 15 games though. He is old. He's on the older side. He is 32. And I think the Bears are going to move towards a youth movement with, DJ Moore, Rome Odunze. And I could see them spending a big money on a receiver. But I think they're going to more focus on that O-line and maybe like a run game to help out Caleb. And I think Keenan might just want to go to a contender, a more established quarterback. And I actually think he's going to go back to the Chargers. I think there's been reports that, he wouldn't, that there's a possibility he could reunite with the Chargers. He can help open the field up for a guy like McConkey. He obviously already has connection and history with Herbert, so you don't have to worry about that. He doesn't know the new offense, but again, he knows Herbert. He can help create space for McConkey and maybe whoever else they add via the draft or trade or free agency. They have a ton of money, and I don't think it'll cost you too much to bring Keenan back. And I think a reunion could be something that we could see with Keenan and the Chargers. Next guy is Darius Slayton from the Giants. I don't think he returns to the Giants. I know they could get a rookie quarterback, and obviously a guy like Slayton could help that guy out. But they could also get a veteran. I've seen like Matt Stafford could get traded to the Giants. But I think Slayton's a guy they let walk, and I have no idea where a guy like Slayton could go. He's just a solid receiver. He's similar to what I said about Palmer. I think Darius Slayton's better than Palmer. He had 500 yards, 2 touchdowns, a somewhat down year. Obviously, the offense was mainly focused on getting Malik Neighbors the ball. But he's just a fine receiver, and I think he'll just end up going to a team with kind of like the Raiders with a decent amount of money to spend that just needs somebody in that receiver room. And a team I like that kind of fits that is the Cardinals. You have Marvin Harrison. And outside of Marvin Harrison, it's like Greg Dortch, Michael Wilson. It's kind of just a collection of guys outside of Marvin Harrison. And then, of course, Trey McBride, too. Slayton can, again, similar to the Palmer to Raiders, Slayton can just give you talent in that receiver room next to Marvin Harrison, just like Palmer can do with Jacoby Myers. They have the money. He won't cost too much, at least I don't think. And he's just a good fit for that team, just to give him somebody as well. Next is Deontay Johnson. Now, when he was on the Panthers, he had that stretch on the Panthers where he was very good. And it looks like he was going to probably either sign with the Panthers for a decent contract or go somewhere else. And then it kind of went downhill for him. Went to the Texans, and then he went to the Ravens, where he ended the season on. And he's kind of completely ruined his value. Like, he's going to sign another 1-year deal probably with whatever team it is. And I don't see him returning back to the Texans. But I actually could see him going back to the Ravens. I think they clearly trusted him enough to keep him on the team. They had him, and then they let him go to the Texans. But I could see him going back to the Ravens. Honestly, I don't really know. I don't even know what team to put him on as the team that he was on to end the season. I just chose the Ravens because I think he's just going to go to the Ravens next season. But honestly, I have no clue where Deontay Johnson could go. Next team is DeAndre Hopkins, DeAndre Hopkins. Was on the Chiefs last year. As I mentioned earlier, I don't think they bring Hollywood and D-Hop back. So I do think if they keep Hollywood, which I think will happen, I think they do let D-Hop walk. I still think he stays on a contender or goes to a contender. He finally got to be in the Super Bowl. And I think he just wants to win the Super Bowl, right? So I think he's going to go to a contender that could use some help at receiver, whether it's the Commanders or the Ravens, the Bills. He could go back to the Chiefs, obviously, still. But a team that could use an extra outside guy, a veteran receiver. They don't really have that super experienced veteran guy, this team. They have money if D-Hop wants a little bit of a bag. They could give it to him. And that's the Detroit Lions. It's a contender, as we mentioned before, one of the best teams in the league. You have Amon Ra, who is like that inside slot guy. You have Jamison Williams, who's your deep threat. And then D Hop can be that reliable target. He can be that veteran. Because Amon Ra is honestly a veteran at this point. He's been in the league long enough. But he still isn't like a veteran. He's not 30 plus. Jamison Williams is super young. They did bring in a guy like Tim Patrick, but I think D Hop is just a much better player. And again, he can still be that veteran and be on that contending team that I'd assume he wants to be on. Next is Stephon Diggs of the Houston Texans. We didn't really get to see him in that receiver room because him and Dell both got hurt. So we didn't get to see him and Stroud's connection. But he doesn't feel like a guy who would go back to the Texans. I just don't know if it worked out. Not only I don't think it worked out to the extent that maybe we thought it would, but I don't know if the Texans can and or want to pay him the money he might want. And a team that does have a ton of money, that has a young, promising quarterback, is the New England Patriots. They don't have Bill Belichick because I don't think Diggs would play with Belichick. But maybe a guy like Mike Vrabel would want a Stephon Diggs on his team. As I mentioned, they have a ton of money. They have their young quarterback in Drake May. Outside of Demario Douglas, they don't have much at receiver. I know a common thing has been that they could go after a guy like McMillan in the draft, but I also could see them spending that pick on a more, maybe not more valuable position, but a position that doesn't have as much options when it comes to like free agency, like the receiver position does. They could get a guy like Will Campbell and then spend a bunch of money on a receiver, but if you draft McMillan, you're not going to be able to get a Will Campbell in free agency. So if they go the free agency route when it comes to receivers, I like Diggs. I like the fit of Diggs because I just don't see him coming back to the Texans. And I think the Patriots could be willing to give him the money that he wants. And they could be a sneaky team next year if they get Drake May some help as well, because Mike Vrabel's a good coach too. Next is Amari Cooper, who played for the Bills. Didn't quite go. He got traded to the Bills mid-season. Didn't quite go how we expected, how we wanted it to go. Very disappointing in the playoffs. At least his usage. I don't know why he didn't get used in the playoffs. He just wasn't, and that was kind of disappointing based on, who Amari Cooper can be. Because just last year he was great for the Browns, and then he kind of had a down season at the beginning for the Browns, and then gets traded to the Bills, and then kind of faded away in their offense. But I have seen things that they could bring him back, give him a full off season with Josh Allen. And I do think that is what happens. I think he goes back to the Bills. I still think there is something there with the fit of Amari Cooper on the Bills. And I think, again, with that full season, with that full off season, we could actually see that connection with him and Josh Allen grow. And I think the fit actually could finally start to work out with him and the Bills. Another guy that I could easily see returning to his team is Chris Godwin, who is next. He just seems like a Buccaneer to me. He had that very unfortunate injury last year, but he's obviously a really good receiver. But early on last season, he was one of the best receivers in the league. I don't think he is quite that, but he was playing very well. And he just feels like a Buck. I think they've already started to talk about renegotiating and extending him. So I think he does go back to the Buccaneers. He fits that offense great. Him, Baker, Mike Evans have a great little connection going. And I don't see him going anywhere else, honestly, but the Buccaneers. Last free agent receiver is T. Higgins, the big name, the name everyone's talking about when it comes to receivers this offseason that could change teams. However, it seems like the Bengals will end up franchise tagging Higgins. That does not mean he will leave, or that doesn't mean he'll stay in Cincinnati. He could still leave. They could just be franchise tagging him so they could trade him. Because you don't want to lose a guy like T. Higgins for nothing. You either want to bring him back or make sure you get something in return for him. So it seems like they're going to either franchise tag him and then extend him, or trade him, or let him play on the franchise tag. So but I don't think they're going to end up trading him. I just don't think they're going to get the return maybe they want. Or because I don't really know how to explain. I just don't know if a team will trade what the Bengals are going to want for T. Higgins, because he's a very good receiver. But if he's on the franchise tag, I don't know if I want to trade for him as a team when he's just going to hit free agency the next year. So I think one way or the other, he's going to be on the Bengals this season. Whether he's on there for 1 year and then gets traded, whether he's on the Bengals and gets extended, I think this next NFL season he will play for the Bengals regardless. I just don't see him getting traded. And it seems like they will franchise tag him, which means he has to get traded in order to switch teams. So I do think that Higgins, despite all the rumors of all these teams that could get him, I do think he stays a Bengal. Last two little bonus players here. These aren't free agents. These are just players who are either been granted access to seek a trade, or it seems inevitable that they're going to get traded or cut. And that's Cooper Kupp and Deebo Samuel. First is Cooper Kupp. He's a little bit on the older side, slot receiver. It's kind of hard to predict who trades for these teams, because we haven't really had any traction or like news of where these guys could go. But a fit I kind of like for Cooper Kupp is the Commanders. Kind of like the Lions, they have their number one guy in Amon-Ra, just like the Commanders have McLaurin. They have guys around him, but they're missing that veteran guy. McLaurin's pretty much 30 himself. But what I like about Cooper Kupp is McLaurin's an outside receiver, right? He plays the boundary or whatever. And Cooper Kupp is a slot guy, and he can just be such a reliable target for Jaden Daniels, because quarterbacks can have great rookie seasons and then can kind of teeter off or plateau in their second season. And you don't want that. You don't want Jaden Daniels to go through a sophomore slump. You want him to continue to get better. And I think a way to do that is to get him a guy like Cooper Kupp who he can trust in the slot to just get open and catch the ball. And they have the money. If he gets cut, I think they could trade for him as well. And I like the fit to Cooper Kupp in Washington. And then the other guy is Deebo Samuel, who seems inevitable that he is going to not be on the Niners next season. And a team that I like for Deebo is Pittsburgh. And the reason I like Deebo on Pittsburgh is because they could end up losing a guy like Najee Harris in free agency, and Deebo has shown that he could get carries out of the backfield, so he can kind of help you with that. He can also just help you in the receiving game, because outside of Pickens, which we don't even know if Pickens is going to be on the team, but outside of Pickens, you don't really have much. Deebo can help you in the receiving game, and he can kind of be like that Cordell Patterson, but just better, because he has a very similar play style to Cordell Patterson, who was on Pittsburgh last year, but again, he's just a better player than him, who plays similar. I think a new change of scenery can really help Deebo. Philly seems like a spot he could go to, because he's very close with A.J. Brown, but I just don't know if the Niners will let him go to Philly. I guess they could cut him and then he could sign to Philly. But if they do trade him, I like him to Pittsburgh, because he can kind of be that gadget guy like Cordell Patterson, but just better. He can help whatever quarterback they bring in. So I like Deebo's fit in Pittsburgh. And that will conclude our our receiver and tight end portion of our 2025 free agency predictions. If you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like. Comment down below some of your opinions on where you think these players are going to end up. And as always, please make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed, and if you don't want to miss more content at Couch Casual as we cover the rest of the NFL offseason. It sucks that there's no football, but we have the offseason, and you can get your content talking about all things NFL offseason over here if you subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.